All right, it's time for Red Rain episode 148. Here is your host, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter, sporting his Sacramento Kings hat. So psyched to see that. And, we're going to try to shed some light, put the beam on these new NFL wide receiver contracts and just how much that might inhibit a team's chance to win a Super Bowl. We've got some interesting historical scenarios to point out from the past 10 Super Bowls. With Justin Jefferson signing that huge contract, getting 35 mil a year, the question came up for Kyle and me was, can you afford to use a fifth or a fourth of your entire salary cap on a quarterback wide receiver tandem? That's our cause today. The history wouldn't suggest it would ever happen. But we never say never around here. And we wonder whether it could. And I look at this year's scenarios, and I picked out some of the quarterback cap hits and wide receiver cap hits. Some of it might be surprising to you. So we're going to dig in and provide some info and some data just to see if this could ever happen. Because in the modern era, it's not happened where the leading receiver in a Super Bowl was the highest paid receiver on the team. And we're going to dive into that. Kyle, we put a chart together of the past 10 Super Bowls. If you could put that up, and he's going to read the quarterbacks for the winning teams, and I'm going to read the wide receivers.
All right, the people should be able to see this graphic here.
Right. Super Bowl 49, winners, the Patriots. Leading receiver was Julian Edelman. He had 9 catches for 109 yards. In that season, he was being paid $4.3 million.
And then for the Patriots, their quarterback and Super Bowl MVP, Tom Brady, although Malcolm Butler probably should have won the Super Bowl MVP that year. I think there's a story Tom Brady gave him the car that used to come with Super Bowl MVP when they did that. Tom Brady made $14.8 million in 2014.
Right. What a steal. Wow. A Super Bowl with the top receiver and quarterback making a mere 19 million combined. Pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So then in Super Bowl 50, the Broncos won. Emmanuel Sanders, 6 receptions for 83 yards, made $4.9 million in that season.
And then the quarterback, you had Peyton Manning starting in the game, who had a whopping $19 million total on his contract that year.
Yeah, he was giving it up for the team, and it paid dividends, that's for sure. So in 51, James White, 14 running back, 14 catches, 110 yards, made a whopping $654,000.
And then you had, of course, Tom Brady once again, Super Bowl MVP for the the fourth time, and was making less than the previous time. He made $13.7 million against the salary cap.
Right. Another running back in 52, Super Bowl 52 for the Eagles, Corey Clement. We know him as a Cardinal fan. 4 catches, 100 yards at $558,000.
And then, of course, you had Nick Foles leading the Philadelphia Eagles, which I didn't know this until seeing the stat. He made $5.5 million that season that they won the Super Bowl, which I would have thought would have been less, but
Yes,
5.5 million for Nick Foles.
right. Well, they signed him to a 2-year, $11 million contract, which was above and beyond what teams were paying then for QB2s. And the Eagles got some scrutiny on that early on when they made that deal. They were like, "What? They're bringing Foles back at that kind of salary?" Well, cha-ching! That was one of the wisest moves that the Eagles have ever made.
Also, just one of the most amazing stories ever. I know we've talked about it a lot over the years, but we really don't appreciate just how crazy it was that Nick Foles came back to lead the Eagles to that Super Bowl run.
It is crazy, and he had just an incredible game. I mean, he was on fire from start to finish. He outdueled Brady, and our boy Malcolm Butler was sitting on the bench, being benched for still nobody knows the reason why, while the cornerback they had in his place was getting torched from start to finish. It was just unbelievable how that happened. But anyway, let's move on. So in 53, Super Bowl 53, the Pats came back and won. Julian Edelman, 10 receptions, 141 yards, Super Bowl MVP at 3.8 million.
And then of course, Mr. Tom Brady, $22 million for his 6th Super Bowl.
Again, wow. Amazing. And, what a sacrifice it was to be able to play at that salary at his, with 2 rings already. I constantly hear, well, it's because of Giselle. And to me, that's bullshit. It's because of Brady. He would have done that no matter who he was married to. What Brady figured out was, you know what? I can take a discount salary because I can also make millions in advertising gigs. I mean, I don't need to rake in all this money to put my team at a disadvantage and, not be able to hire, to fill the roster with championship quality players, so the sacrifice paid off there. He got his 3rd ring.
Well, he really got his 6th ring at that point, which is, if you go all the way back to the early years.
3rd ring in this span. Yeah, exactly.
In the second Patriots dynasty. And also, I think that immortality factor of winning all the time has paid dividends on the back end for him. When you look at the money he's been able to get from the television deal to call games for Fox, when you think about the roast for Netflix, whatever he got paid for that is something that probably doesn't happen without all the success of the second Patriots run. He tried to buy into the Raiders at like a 70% discount on a percentage of the team. Those things kind of paid dividends on the back end.
Yeah, what I got mixed up with, I was just before we came on looking up what year in Brady's career he won his first Super Bowl. It happened to be in his 2nd season. And so then I did the wrong math. I mean, that you're absolutely right. That was his 6th. I mean, imagine that, winning 6 Super Bowls in, and only counting 22 million on your team's cap. It's unthinkable. Unheard
I think the other testament to his longevity is, imagine winning 6, eventually 7 Super Bowls and going a decade without winning a Super Bowl. Like, during the years he was making the most money with the Patriots, they did not win a championship. And during the best, the MVP years of his career, I know he won MVP the year that they won Super Bowl 53, but I still attest that Todd Gurley got screwed out of the MVP that year.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So in Super Bowl 54, the Chiefs come in with their first one under Andy Reid. Tyreek Hill, 9 catches, 105 yards, was making $22 million that year.
While the Super Bowl MVP, number 15, Patrick Mahomes, is making a paltry $5 million during the first
Right.
Super Bowl run.
Right. See how that works? Interesting that the very next year they traded Hill away. So we can talk about that later. In 55, Super Bowl 55, the Bucks now with Brady, Rob Gronkowski, 6 for 67 yards, $9 million.
And Mr. Tom Brady, Super Bowl MVP, $15 million.
Wow. Incredible. And then 56, Super Bowl 56, Cooper Kupp for the Rams, 8 receptions, 92 yards. Super Bowl MVP, $13 million.
And then you have Mr. Matthew Stafford winning his first Super Bowl as the third best player on the Rams, making $26.5 million.
Correct. To date, that was the highest paid tandem, which if we do the quick math, is basically close to $40 million, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And
so to date, that's kind of the record.
If I remember, the salary cap was somewhere around 190 million back then, I want to say. So, or maybe 200 million. So call it 20% of your salary cap, roughly.
Right. Yep. Good point. So in Super Bowl 57, the Chiefs come back in with Travis Kelce, tight end, 6 receptions, 81 yards, 17.1 million.
Along with your Super Bowl MVP, Patrick Mahomes, and his $35 million, which that season was second in the NFL, only behind, weirdly, Ryan Tannehill.
Wow. Incredible. And that pulls the figure up to, let's see, 52 combined. And then we get it a step further last year in Super Bowl 58, Travis Kelce, 9 for 93, 17.1 million.
And then Patrick Mahomes, Super Bowl MVP for the third time, a $37 million cap hit.
Okay, so that's the highest total ever of, well, actually, we can't say that because Kelce is not a wide receiver. So in looking at this list, Kyle, what stands out to you? What things do you notice?
Well, I think the first trend is, of course, the fact that we have the first trend is higher wide receiver number or lower quarterback number, or higher quarterback, lower wide receiver for much of the first 8 years until you get to the Kelce and the Kelce Mahomes second run. The other trend that I would point to is just, in order to win a Super Bowl, beyond the numbers, is the best testament of your ability to win a Super Bowl is having Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes, because 70% of the last 10 Super Bowls have had either Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. And then my other favorite stat, which isn't on this, but is underlined by that, is that the last time we had an AFC championship game that did not have Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes was 2010. It's been 15 years going on next year since we've had an AFC championship without either Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. And what's so interesting about that is Brady was consistently at lower dollar values when it came to the salary cap, while now we have Mahomes making more money than the traditional quarterback would make relative to the salary cap. But this year he'll be, I believe, number 1 in terms of actual dollars against the cap. I don't know how the new contracts are structured yet, but a lot of the last 2 years they've been able to win the championship despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes has been the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. relative to salary cap numbers. I know they've restructured it a little bit to have some of his cash spread out, but actually this upcoming year Patrick Mahomes is going to be, in terms of cap number, he's going to be 6th in the NFL this upcoming season, but he was 2nd the 2 years ago when they won the Super Bowl, and last year he was number 1. So last year he was number 1 on the cap, and then this upcoming year he'll be 6th in the league.
Yeah. And I think it was significant that they moved on from Tyreek Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a numbers standpoint, that was what would make sense to them. And obviously they've discovered a tremendous formula by, with Mahomes taking a bit of a home team, discount. Let's be honest. I mean, Mahomes at 37 million is a steal. Now it's going to catch up with them later on, but for now they're winning rings, and he counts only 37 this year. So, but they've got some interesting receiver situations going on there. Their highest paid receiver this year is going to be Marquise Brown at 8.2. But they have Kelsey coming back at 19.6. So they're going to maybe be pushing that number a little bit. But for them to three-peat. But can you post the list back up? Because I want to point out some things that I found curious. That when you look at this, it begs some questions about just how important a high-paid number 1 wide receiver is to Super Bowl success. Now, it's stunning to me that the only wide receivers to ever win Super Bowl MVPs happen to be slot guys. So, your traditional perimeter wide receiver, Randy Moss type, does not show up on these kind of lists in Super Bowls. And with the Pats, he unfortunately came up short in what was one of the greatest seasons ever, thanks to the Giants. But that's what strikes me here. What strikes me here too is the emergence of running backs and tight ends as leading receivers. And, the 49ers just re-upped Christian McCaffrey. At what was it, 19 a year?
Yeah, I believe it was a 2-year, 39 million extension.
I mean, that's if he stays healthy, which he's managed to do while he's been the 49er, which has been amazing. That's such a bargain because he's both. I mean, he can run it out of the backfield and he can win out of the slot, as well as just about anyone on the planet. So, but if you look at the lists of leading receivers here, it's underwhelming in terms of, the money that was being, made by these receivers, and by the fact that there's really not a stud, sort of prototypical wide receiver 1 on there. Although it begs the question, is the distinction of wide receiver 1 now shifting over to slot guys, or guys who are versatile enough to play both, which Justin Jefferson is. And, with Justin Jefferson, it made some sense for the Vikings to get a deal done with him because now they're shifting to J.J. McCarthy, and they're going to have him on a 4 to 5 year rookie contract. So that combination gives you hope. And there are past rookie contract guys who've won Super Bowls. In fact, the last 2 to do it, I think, were in their second years. Was Brady, of course, and then Russell Wilson in his second year. So, and the formula there is that both of those guys had real good defenses to be able to lean on in difficult games, which comes as and you have to be able to pay those defenses, to have enough quality championship caliber players, right? So, the other thing is how modest the quarterback salaries are on this list. And to date, the most a quarterback has made in a Super Bowl is 37 mil. It's kind of amazing. Now, this is the way the teams do it. They sign under the big year deals, and they take lower cap hits for the first few years. I mean, look at this for this year in terms of cap hits. Trevor Lawrence just signed that big deal. 5 years, 275 million. Before I comment on that, what's your take on that contract, Little Rock?
Remember the joke I make about the Jaguars tax? This is the Jaguars tax. Is Trevor Lawrence worth the highest paid contract in the number one contract in the NFL right now? No, he is not. Are the Jaguars going to find a quarterback of his caliber willing to come play in Jacksonville? No, they are not. So this is a mutually agreeable contract for both sides.
Right.
But anyone who's going to argue Trevor Lawrence is worthy of a top 5 quarterback salary is projecting a little bit on what Trevor Lawrence is going to be, but he is worth that to the Jaguars because the Jaguars, who's the second greatest quarterback in the history of the Jaguars? Is it David Garrard? Is David Garrard the next best quarterback on the list for the Jaguars? They need Trevor Lawrence.
Right. And they paid him. And who's to say? I mean, Lawrence has talent. He's paid him coming off pretty, struggle-filled season for him and the team. So it's a leap of faith. But in terms of the wide receivers, the curious thing is, when you look at up their salaries this year for counting against the cap, do you know who number one on? They're counting Lawrence for 15 mil of this 275 in his first year of the contract.
Interesting.
So do you know who the number one highest paid player per the salary cap this season is on the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Let me think, because Lawrence's deal won't go into effect for a couple of years because they still have a 5th-year option on him. It's not Ridley. It's not. I'm gonna say Christian Kirk.
You're amazing, Christian Kirk.
Okay.
Get this, at 24 million.
I wonder where that puts him in the list of all wide receivers going into this year.
Right.
I looked that up real quick. He is number 7 on the list of cap hits by a wide receiver. The people above him, his contemporaries, are not receivers of the caliber of Christian Kirk, as we might describe it. There are some more traditional elite wide receivers in the group, and also Christian Kirk.
Right. Kirk is a slot guy who's warmed up more to playing in the slot in Jacksonville than he did in Arizona. Who knows? He could go off, but that's another leap of faith, and it's a lot of money to pay Kirk, who's been good but not great, and has all kinds of potential, as we know. So we'll see.
You have the list up right there. What's the number that they're paying a Rick Armstead for this year? Do you know?
I don't know. Okay. I had it before, and I don't have it in front of me now. However, okay. So I don't think it's, with his case too, I think it's a lower figure so that they can try to compete for a Super Bowl this year. This is what they're thinking. I mean, that's why they're going with 15 for Lawrence this year. That would indicate, well, we think we got a shot, and we think we have the defenses coming around really. They're young and good, and we retained some people and added some people, and we think we're going to be good. And so we think we can win our division and compete for this. So it's obvious that they were planning it that way. But the combination of Kirk at 24 and Lawrence at 15 is only 39 million. Which puts them right in the, it's not taking up, put it this way, a whole fifth or a quarter of their cap, which is the point here. However, when that's why the most, sort of tenuous situation right now is in Dallas with Dak, because Dak is scheduled to count 55 million on this year's cap. They also are paying CeeDee Lamb 18 and Brandon Cooks 10. So between the three of them, you're talking pretty much like almost a third of the whole salary cap. I don't like their chances, given that, and that's why, what's your take on the Dak situation?
So what I do give Jerry Jones credit for, and he did this the last time they were negotiating with Dak as well, back in 2019, 2020, after he broke his leg. Remember, there were questions
Yeah,
about whether he would get the extension. And Jerry made it clear from the very beginning, like, we are going to get this done with Dak. Like, he never put the hint of doubt in the fact that they might not extend Dak Prescott. Publicly, he was always very, Dak is our guy and we're going to work something out. And a lot of the reports you're seeing are like Cowboys prioritizing Dak Prescott's extension before CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons and things of those sorts. So it
right,
seems they're trying to publicly never put the onus on we might not extend Dak, when the reality is they might not extend Dak Prescott at the end of this contract. They might, depending on how this goes, clear shop and build around CeeDee Lamb making $35 million a year, uh,
right,
Micah Parsons making $30+ million a year. Those are the two guys we're going to invest in and kind of figure things out from there. Whether it's with an in-house option like giving Trey Lance an opportunity to develop, or because remember, Trey Lance is the same age as Bo Nix. If you think Trey Lance's career is over, Trey Lance is still very young and still the Cowboys' backup quarterback. Maybe they go that route. Maybe they go the draft out option, but there is a real possibility Dak might not be back after next season, but the Cowboys publicly are making it very clear they're not throwing that shadow of a doubt into the conversation.
right. And now, as mentioned, the Chiefs with Mahomes at 37, Kelsey at close to 20, and Marquise Brown at 8.2. Those three players count a lot, well over a quarter of the cap. The question is, can they three-peat with that? Now, my reaction to that is they've got a formula now of like, notice that they love how they're drafting, especially on defense, and they think they can win with Spagnuolo coaching up young players. And they redid, Jones's contract in the middle, so they got that done, Chris Jones, because they realize they want one stud in the middle who's going to wreak havoc. But they've surrounded Jones with good football players, quality football players who can tackle and cover, and so they've got a formula now going in Kansas City where other teams may want to look at and model, and where they still have a championship caliber roster, given their success in recent years. It's amazing. But credit their draft guys, credit their coaches who put their players in and give them a chance to succeed. And Andy Reid does it as well too, with his young receivers and his makeshift offensive lines. He gets a lot out of. So you have that. Then over in LA, you got a really interesting situation. I don't know how Super Bowl qualified they are, but this would seem prohibitive to me, is that you've got between Stafford making 40, counting 49.5 versus a cap, and Cup counting 29.8. Can't see it happen. I can't see. And plus losing Aaron Donald. I mean, counting those two guys for over a quarter of your cap. I mean, they got the young players. They're kind of doing what the Chiefs are doing too. They got the young players. I don't think they have a Spagnuolo, in the building, especially after Raheem Morris left. Raheem, and And with Donald, there should be a bit of an after effect after Donald leaving.
I mean,
I
there
don't
has
think
to
they
be.
have
That's
enough.
the greatest defensive player I've ever seen in my lifetime. There has to,
Right.
even though he was an older player, there has to be some sort of effect to him leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the privilege of watching Lawrence Taylor, and I would say for me, Taylor and Aaron Donald were as good as it ever got in terms of you know defensive guys who could dominate football games. But yeah, so and then in San Francisco, what's going on with their wide receivers is interesting because Debo's counting 28.6 this year, and if they hang on to Ayuk, he'll count 14.1, and now they got McCaffrey. I didn't see what McCaffrey's counting. It probably won't be 19. They're probably going to make it a more manageable figure. But you got Brock Purdy on a 7th-round rookie contract, so that makes it more feasible for them to be to compete. And then the situation in Miami with Tua. They're going to pay Tua. This year he counts 23, but Hill counts 31, and Waddle should count a lot more, but they're going easy on him in the first year of his extension by counting him for only 9. But between Hill and Waddle, you got 40 million counting, and then Tua's current cap hit would be 27 playing on the tag. I mean, on the 5th-year option, So it's fascinating stuff. I mean, caponomics, people, looking at these numbers, and what was curious to me is that, how can you afford to pay such big money to a wide receiver if you're also paying a quarterback premier dollar? And it has relevance to me because looking down the road with, Marvin Harrison Jr., I mean, I would expect after 3 years, he's going to want to be paid. And by then, are you talking 40 million a year? And by then, if Kyler's counting 50 something, would that just blow the Cardinals' chances completely of contending for anything meaningful? What's your thought on that?
So going back to the list that you put together at the very beginning of the show, with the last 10 leading receivers in Super Bowls and their quarterback salaries, it seems more like, because so many quarterbacks are making big money nowadays and higher percentages of the cap, it stands to reason that those quarterbacks are going to win more Super Bowls statistically because there's just so many of them, right? There's so many
Right,
quarterbacks that are making 40 plus million upcoming that some of them are going to win a championship. Now,
right,
ultimately, the only people who have won a championship so far are Patrick Mahomes and Matthew Stafford when it comes to larger salaried quarterback numbers.
right,
And even the Stafford year, I mean, Cooper Kupp, who's the Super Bowl MVP, was the greatest value I can think of in the sport that year, where he's setting receiving records while still making a modest salary, because I believe that was the 4th year of his rookie contract, which I believe was a 3rd-round rookie contract, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, they're making a ton of money, or there was a ton of money being paid to Aaron Donald for being the reason that they won that Super Bowl. The reason they won that Super Bowl is having Aaron Donald as the anchor of that defense at the
right,
center of everything that they were doing.
right.
And so I think that those are exceptional cases, but as time goes on, I do think, and I've had this thought for years, is that all of these quarterbacks are eventually going to split up the championships, right? Lamar's eventually going to get one. I believe Josh
Right.
Allen's eventually going to get one. I believe Joe Burrow's eventually going to get one. I would still hold out hope that Jalen Hurts is eventually going to get a Super Bowl. Like all these quarterbacks will eventually get theirs, even while they make the gigantic salaries. It's just it's incredibly exceptional that Kansas City has dominated the sport despite how many great options are in the wake behind them and how many people they've had to take down, especially this last year. This last year is just crazy because that offense was bad for Kansas City. I joked about it after the Super Bowl. Kansas City went a full 4 quarters in the playoffs, a 60-minute football game in the playoffs without scoring a single point. From the second quarter of the AFC Championship game to the second quarter of the Super Bowl, they didn't score a single point and still won the Super Bowl, which is
Amazing.
yeah,
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
Kansas City. This last Super Bowl for Kansas City is such an anomaly, I feel like. But to your graph, I was curious about the first 7 years of the graph when it was very clear that low quarterback salaries were the way to go. And I went back and looked through some of the numbers just briefly, and I don't think having a higher paid receiver was so cost effective back then because you could afford to have a higher paid quarterback and a higher paid receiver because receiver salaries weren't as exceptional as they were. The year that the Broncos won the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 50, Emmanuel Sanders was the leading receiver in the Super Bowl, and I can put our wonderful graph back up here. Emmanuel Sanders was their leading receiver in their Super Bowl, but the highest paid receiver was Demaryius Thomas, who was third in the NFL among receivers, making only $12 million.
Right. Right.
The year that the Patriots won with James White as the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl
Right.
51. If you remember that year, they beat the Falcons, and that was the 28-3 game.
Right.
In a world where the Falcons don't blow that 28-3 lead, that
Right.
graph right there would say leading receiver Julio Jones, who was making the number one salary cap number among receivers, which was, I believe, $17.5 million, the same
Right.
number that Travis Kelce is making presently by modern numbers for
Right.
the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think wide receiver numbers weren't as cost prohibitive back then. This one was my favorite one that I found real quickly. Super Bowl 54, the year that Kansas City won the Super Bowl.
Right.
Do you know who the highest paid receiver was in the NFL relative to the salary cap?
No.
It was on the Kansas City Chiefs. It was not Tyreek Hill. It was Sammy Watkins.
What?
Sammy Watkins against the cap was the highest value in the NFL. And the following year that Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl, Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill were both top 5 in the NFL against the salary cap for Kansas City, and Kansas City made it to the Super Bowl. It's very strange, but remember, Patrick Mahomes was making $5 million a year. They got Sammy Watkins away from, I believe he was in Green Bay at that time, and brought
Wow.
him to Kansas City. And then they paid Tyreek Hill that first extension, and it was fine. Patrick Mahomes was the greatest value in the sport. So it's interesting to see how that all kind of plays out. I think back then, because receiver numbers weren't so cost prohibitive, it was okay to pay receivers a little bit more. But now you're seeing teams make legitimate decisions about quarterbacks or receivers. Justin
Yeah.
Jefferson gets paid. Vikings go with a rookie quarterback. CeeDee Lamb potentially gets paid. Potentially, new rookie quarterback comes in for the Dallas Cowboys in the coming
Right.
years. You know,
Right.
there may not be money for Dak. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle get extended. Well, maybe we're not going to bring back Tyreek Hill. Deebo Samuel gets an extension. Jimmy Garoppolo, goodbye. See you later. You know, it's like teams have to make those decisions now. And
Right.
so the teams who do end up paying for both have to make difficult decisions elsewhere. And not everyone is as shrewd and smart as Kansas City has been in their vision for rebuilding a defense. So I think years ago it wasn't as cost prohibitive to have a top paid wide receiver. It was just the teams that ultimately won the Super Bowl were the ones who were finding value within the margins. But I think I undervalued how important a wide receiver was back 4 years ago. I now see the like wide receiver, I think, is the third most valuable position in the NFL behind a top end quarterback and a top end pass rusher. I would argue even potentially over a top end tackle. I think a top end wide receiver can be just as valuable. Um, I undervalued what the receiver position was worth, and I think the rest of the league has kind of caught up to that as well, based on the fact that the top end receivers are getting paid so much money.
Right. Well, and now, we did the math on the top receivers this year in 2023, and they're all slot guys.
Mm-hmm.
So, because CD was playing primarily in the slot, they're all Armand St. Brown. I mean, that guy's a stud, and he doesn't even run a 5.4. I mean, a 4.5. I
I'm
mean,
like,
four
I hope he runs a 5.4.
a 4.4. Excuse me. But he's got great hands. He's got shake. He's got nuance. I mean, the guy isn't all pro for a reason. And, with the emergence of Nakua in LA, the slot receiver position, which Brady started to romanticize back with Wes Welker and then with Julian Edelman, is now more of a factor than it's ever been because, and you and I have been discussing this for quite some time, if you can win like Brady did over the middle of the football field, you can win a lot of games. It's beating teams over the middle between the linebackers and safeties on a consistent basis. And what was so cool about the Patriots, and I think that other teams have copycatted this, is that they'd run one guy at you into that zone. If he was covered, then they'd run a second guy. And then if he was covered, then they'd sneak the running back into underneath. So if you backed off the linebackers, now you had to contend with a running back like James White, and suddenly James White has 140 yards in a Super Bowl. How does that happen? So there's this sort of brilliant ways to attack the middle of the football field. And if you got a receiver who helps you do that, and I would argue that Justin Jefferson helps you do that, and you have a rookie quarterback coming in for a 4 or 5 year rookie deal, it makes sense. But with people who are paying quarterbacks, like you said, Joe Burrow will probably get one of his. I don't know. I mean, well, this year, look at this. I mean, they're not counting him as much as they should on the cap. It's only at 30, which is going to catch up to them later. And then you got, Higgins now at 21. They just, he signed the 10 or tag. And you got Chase, who I think probably they skimmed a little on this year. We'll have to pay more for next year. So that combination is pushing close to 70 mil, combined for those three players. I don't know if the Bengals have a good enough roster to compete, given that portion of the cap was spent on your wide receivers and quarterback.
The thing I've said about the Bengals is they're in the same position right now that Baltimore was in 2 years ago, where they have to reinvent themselves around the quarterback a bit. And Baltimore did a tremendous job. They brought in two fantastic coordinators, 3 defensive stars from Madubuike to Roquan Smith to Patrick Queen and all the guys on that defense, and then brought in a bunch of new receivers. The Bengals have to reinvent themselves here.
Yeah, if I were looking at these numbers based on Super Bowl results, the 2 teams that I think were most likely to win the Super Bowl are the Lions, where Goff only counts 27 this season. St. Brown, after his deal, is only counting 5. And then you got Williams, the rookie, at 4.8. That's a really modest sum there of their salary cap. Or the Niners. who've got Purdy playing for basically nothing, and you've got Debo at 28.6. I think they're going to move on from Ayuk. I mean, why draft, two wide receivers, two slot guys of, Cowing, and they got the kid from Florida who is really, really good. I mean, he's been turning heads in Pearsall. He's been turning heads left and right. I mean, this paved the way for, trading Ayuk. And I think they're probably going to get that done. I don't think they're going to count Ayuk. It would have to count him. What's this here? What's my note? Ayuk, 14.1, Kyle. I don't see it.
So as someone who is around the San Francisco 49ers world and around the Northern California Bay Area football atmosphere, the Last Dance documentary that came out with the Bulls. The 49ers are treating this like a last dance, and the fact that real hard decisions are going to have to be made after this season. And in fairness, losing a Rick Armstead was tough. He was a multi-year captain and an anchor of the defense, but ultimately they were going to consider moving Armstead to the bench. They just have so many guys in the middle of that defense. And so this is their kind of last hoorah, their last chance to try and win a Super Bowl. And look, it's hard to say they have a better chance this year than last year. They were literally in overtime of the Super Bowl.
Right.
I think their best chance to win a Super Bowl just passed them by. I feel pretty confident in saying their best chance to win a Super Bowl just passed them by. But this is kind of, with the current core of the team as it looks right now, this is kind of their last run with this group together, because they're gonna have to make some tough decisions on some of those receivers and potentially a big defensive guy. Like, I think this might be Charvarius Ward's last year with the Niners too. They have to make some tough decisions at the end of this.
Yeah, that's a big contract there. Yeah, the more success you have, the more people want to get paid. So, and the more you have to kind of figure out how to move forward under the salary cap, which, I think the football gods put in there as like the ultimate, kind of equalizer and kind of biblical test on, the test of greed on players and teams and this and that, because it's created, all sorts of scenarios that are precarious, and, everybody wants to get paid, and, how can you do it? But there are these guys who make sacrifices. I mean, why do the football gods love Brady and Mahomes? Right?
If the football gods are the ones who put in the salary cap, then that means Jerry Jones is your football god, because Jerry Jones is largely responsible for the implementation of the salary cap back in the 1990s, which was silly by Jerry Jones because he's the one with the most money. He could have blown everything out of the water and spent all this money on all these players with the Cowboys, but Jerry Jones likes the fixed income, and it's made him incredibly wealthy as a result of that. But it's passing the buck onto the players to have to make the sacrifices and the tough decisions versus the Brown family in Cincinnati deciding to cough up an extra 20 million for T. Higgins.
But answer the question: why do the football gods love Brady and Mahomes? What do they have in common?
I really don't know where you're alluding to with the question. I don't. Brady and Mahomes. I don't know. What are you thinking?
Well, both made, financial sacrifices to their teams to not have to count so much against the cap that it inhibited their team's chances to win. Both are clutch players under the brightest of lights. Mahomes is adored, I think, by every football god up on Mount Lombardi. I mean, because he plays with such enthusiasm and bounce, and, and the element of surprise. Brady was more methodical and nip at your heels the whole game and just kill you by 1,000 cuts. But with Mahomes, he's a big play waiting to happen every minute. He's the master of improvisation and creativity. Um, there's just something buoyant and uplifting about that kid. But at the same time, he's not greedy. He's letting his nuggies make make the money for him, I mean, counting at his getting his third ring while only counting 37 versus the cap in this modern era is an incredible sacrifice. I mean, I think he continued to do that for the chance to win rings. And of course, Brady was the ultimate. And people want to mitigate that with he had a famous model wife, which I think is just bizarre. And if you don't understand Tom Brady, um, you know, for him, he was always willing to sacrifice the money for the sake of the team and the roster. He's the ultimate team guy. Ultimate. He had his flaws. I mean, he could be, petulant as they come at times, and then some of the controversies and this and that. But it was never enough for the football gods to say, "Oh, like this guy anymore." But it's interesting that you said Jerry Jones, because I was thinking, why do the Cowboys just get, you know, lose these incredibly frustrating playoff games every year if and when they get there? I'm not sure that the playoff gods have ever been all that enamored with Jerry Jones for a variety of reasons. And that's probably discussion for another time. But I think that they would take exception to some of the decisions that Jones makes regarding the team. Kind of the way he's dominated that organization for a long time. His coaching decisions, I think, might not play too well with the football gods. His decisions on, the quarterback of his team, who's fantastic in the regular season, in the playoffs, he's been, error prone.
What's funny is you can say that, and I don't actually know which quarterback you're talking about in terms of the
Right.
Dallas Cowboys' recent history.
Well, Dak. I mean,
but people said the same thing about Tony Romo, and people said the same thing about Drew Bledsoe. Like,
true.
it's funny how they've basically gotten the same caliber of quarterback three consecutive hits in a row.
And I think maybe it has to do with Jerry Jones's hovering helicopter-like presence in that organization and the pressure that he puts on the players and the expectations. And he's one who expects his team to compete and win a Super Bowl every year. And when was the last time they won one?
That would be well before I was born.
Yeah. So, I mean, something's going on there with the football guys.
I'll put it even this way. In the last 16 years of NFL football, the NFC has been hit with a tremendous amount of parity over the past 16 years. 13 teams in the NFC have made the NFC Championship, and 12 have made it to the Super Bowl. In the last, I'm sorry, 14 teams have made it to the NFC Championship game. 12 have made it to the Super Bowl. The only two that haven't gotten to the NFC Championship game are Washington and Dallas. Ironically, the two franchises that were most instrumental in putting the salary cap in place back in the 1990s.
Oh, that's a classic Little Rock stat. Unbelievable.
It goes to your football god's point, right? Is that it was Jerry Jones and I forgot.
Snyder.
I think it was pre-Daniel Snyder ownership group, but then Daniel Snyder comes in and runs the organization into the ground. And in the 90s, when they put in the salary cap, they were like, we don't have to spend big money. We can beat these teams evenly. And then Dan Snyder gets in and completely runs the organization into the ground. And now, now that the Lions have made it, because the Lions were one of the teams in that group before. Now that the Lions went to the NFC Championship game, the last 16 years, every franchise has gone to the NFC Championship game except Washington and Dallas.
Great call. So with that, we're really excited to announce that we're going to start having some pretty amazing guests over the next few weeks. Brett Coleman has agreed to come back close to training camp, as he said he might when we met with him pre-draft. He's been very high on the Cardinals draft, so and it'll be great to get his perspectives. As always, Dan Viennes, the Seahawks podcaster, who I visited with recently. Great podcaster. Really knows his stuff. And we're going to do a preview of the NFC West. And then I'm just absolutely thrilled. Just got a note from Dan Bickley of Arizona Sports Radio. I've been asking him to come on Red Rain for a few weeks now, and he said he'd be happy to come on. And I'm a big Dan Bickley fan. Put it this way: there was one Arizona sportscaster back when the Cardinals played the home game against the Packers, after getting whooped left and right by the Packers the week before at home, who predicted the Cardinals would win. And it was Dan Bickley. And I will never, ever forget that. And of course, it was the most epic playoff game I've ever seen, of two quarterbacks going back and forth between Aaron Rodgers and Kurt Warner, who played the perfect game, and then to have that game end on a forced fumble by Michael Adams of all people, and Dansby scooping it up. That was just such a thrill. So, but to have Dan Bickley here, and I want to talk to Dan about the importance of media and how media can really help, be a driving force for professional teams. Because I got to tell you this, living in Boston area, I just read the paper every day for a whole season of the Celtics writers, like in the Boston Globe and Boston Herald. They were on that team like Red Pollard on Seabiscuit, jockeying that team from, if any player had a rough day, you heard about it. I mean, they won 80 games and lost 21 in the entirety, which is unheard of. Practically 80% winning percentage, 79.8. But the media, they had the young coach. They were on that young coach, Joe Mazzulla. It was just stunning to watch. And at times you almost felt like, man, guys, just totally relentless. Cut some guys a little slack. I mean, on Tatum, they rode Tatum like, oh my God. And that's fascinating to me, because I think that when trying to hold organizations, coaches, players to the highest of standards and being persistent about it, I think can make a huge difference. And I'm going to be really fascinated to see what Dan Bickley has to say about that. So we're really excited about the guests coming up, and really excited at how many of you are joining us, and we appreciate the numbers, and let's keep it rolling. So until the interim, may the red rain shower down on you into a red sea. Red rain.